Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to take a look at the state of our economy with a bit of sobering analysis. There was a good chunk of it from the Financial Times, and when you read a comment from a senior economist saying that growth will be imperceptible for the rest of the decade, it's worth taking note of exactly what the problems are. Because when Labour come in, growth being imperceptible for the rest of the decade is not going to be a great situation for them to be in, because unlike the Tories, they absolutely have to boost the economy. So they're going to have to understand those problems, and they're going to have a plan to deal with it. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So first thing it's worth doing is looking at how our economy has been behaving. It's always worth pointing out to those who think the Conservatives are the party of the economy, the data does not back this up. I'll do a more complete one as we get near the election. But for now, I've looked at our GDP for 3 key years. 1997, when Labour last took power. 2010, when they lost it to the Conservatives. And 2022, which is, of course, the last year for which we have an annual GDP figure. I've used dollars, the international currency there, and an international inflation calculator for this. Because obviously I'm going to use real terms. It's what you would do for international comparisons. I'm not going to do that in this video, but I am going to discuss global issues. But however you slice it, Labour grew the economy and the Tories shrunk it. It's easy to see how people can fail to take notice of this because the Tory client media don't really point it out. You know, glorious headlines if the economy grows a little bit, and then, oh, the economy's shrunk a little bit, unless they're after embarrassing the current Tory leader, as is the case now. They generally it's just tumbleweeds. But if you take the long-term look at things, the economy has been stagnant for 15 years. Consider that the 2010 value for the economy was after a huge financial banking crisis. Yet the economy was still larger at the end of it than when Labour first came to power. So the Tories don't really get to blame COVID. Yes, that was a huge shock to the system. Absolutely it was. And of course that was going to shrink GDP as it has for everyone's. But the real terms growth was non-existent before it as well. Also, article I was reading in the Financial Times had an interesting insight. It noted that output was no higher in September and October than it was in January. Now, this is absolutely huge. Let me explain why it matters. I actually see the impact of this all the time as a YouTuber because I'm being paid in ad revenues and I like doing spreadsheets and I analyse these things. In a normal year, the ad rate goes up in September and then it's higher still in October and then higher still in November and December. Why? Because the last few months of the year represent a huge spend. People do not spend evenly across the year. It's massively loaded into the last few months. So you've got various holidays culminating in Christmas, which are huge consumer events. So to meet the extra demand, production ramps up in the last third of the year. This is reflected in the extra advertising spending. Then after Christmas, people have spent up, they tighten their belts in January and February, so production falls down, trade drops off a cliff, and advertising revenue similarly shrinks. But this year, my ad rate in September and October was less than January. ITV were also complaining about a lack of ad revenue this year. And this is because consumer confidence is so low that demand simply hasn't ramped up as expected. It did increase in November and December. I can see that from my ad rates. Obviously, we don't have the economic data for those months yet, but I can see from my ad rates that it has actually jumped up. There's been an increase in November and December, but it's still below previous years. And this article is also reflecting the same thing from a production point of view. If production is at January levels in September and October, our economy is going nowhere. Because what's happening is when that production has ramped up, it's ramped up for a smaller period of time and still not as much as it would have done in previous years. So we can see the effect. We can see that the economy has not grown in real terms since 2010. If you're interested in fixing it, it's easy to just blame the Tories for it. But if you are actually interested in fixing it, it's like, okay, well, we know the Tories aren't going to fix it. So blaming them only gets you so far. Might get you into the position where you're able to fix it. But how do you do that? So, because first of all, it isn't all the Tories. Ironically, this is a problem for Labour. Because if it could all be explained by Tory mismanagement of the economy and their incompetence and greed, then it'd be quite easy and relatively quick to turn it around, wouldn't it? You would just run the economy more competently, and all of a sudden it's great. But the main factors cited in the articles, they're the same ones we've heard before from other sources. Rising interest rates, volatile energy prices, Brexit, COVID, low productivity, long-term shortage of investment. And I'm going to go over each one, but they're all interlinked as well, and that's the part of the problem here. So the rising interest rates, quite complex, but essentially they've come about because the government insists that the Bank of England manage inflation. That's your job, you manage inflation. But inflation can be caused by a couple of things, supply or demand. But the Bank of England have only got one lever to deal with inflation, interest rates. Raising interest rates can work if the reason for high inflation is, say, lots of people are borrowing and raising the demand for products and services. So a lot of people feeling flush, the economy is growing, start getting loans out for like kitchen improvements and stuff like that. Okay, raises inflation. But if you make the cost of borrowing more expensive, you cool down that demand. So people will only borrow for things they really need then. That's the idea. But the problem we've had is mostly supply side, linked to that low productivity. The low productivity in the UK has been linked to a difficulty in hiring foreign labour since Brexit, and a huge chunk of our domestic workforce just disappearing since COVID. The government are trying to focus on this latter group, but persuading people who are financially able to retire to come out of retirement, that is a bit of a mug's game. Put simply, Labour need to boost productivity. In the long term, things like education to plug our skills gap can help, but in the short term, you're going to need careful investment and you're going to need a fit-for-purpose immigration system. Energy prices, that can only be dealt with in the short term by taxing windfall profits and using the money to compensate energy companies, for the higher cost of fuel, which was Labour's plan anyway. Long term, yes, Labour will move us away from a reliance on fossil fuels. But in the short term, ultimately, all they can do is say to energy companies, you need to keep these energy prices down. That's all they can do. And in order to do that, they're going to have to stop excessive profits from driving those energy prices up. Brexit, the really tough nut to crack. But it would solve several problems as well. There's lots interlinked to this. For example, the lack of investment has been caused by Brexit. I mean, the lack of foreign investment hit as soon as that referendum result was in, because investors could see what was coming. Brexit introduces several main problems for businesses. First, the regulatory environment is unstable. With sensible governments, you bring in a new rule and then you give businesses a couple of years to get ready. It may be they need to upgrade some equipment. You may make some funding available for that, for example. What happens now is the Tories change some rules to stop their party bickering, because that's what it's for. It's not about business. It's about stopping their party bickering. They give businesses no notice and no funding to prepare. Like, there are a load of regulations being chopped in 2 weeks' time. It's not many business owners really know which ones or how it will affect their business. The second problem is that the regulatory environment is hostile. Tories say, well, businesses want deregulation. It's like, no, they don't. They want aligned regulation. If their regulations are different to other markets, then there's more cost and paperwork in exporting to and importing from those markets. Yes, many businesses might like deregulation on a global scale, perhaps. For everyone to weaken their standards, maybe, then they have the choice. But given that the EU, the most important market, isn't doing that, they don't want us to either. And the third problem is a lack of access to customers due to trade barriers. Now, if these problems could at least be eased to a large degree, it would unlock more investment and it would boost productivity by a combination of better access to labour and better access to customers. The fallout from COVID is very difficult. There are two main reasons that I'd identify, although there'll be others as well. The first is we have a huge healthcare problem now. Massive waiting lists, getting up to 8 million. That means there's workers in that 8 million who, because they're not getting treatment promptly, are not at full productivity. Well, you've got workers who can't get up to full productivity. That's hitting your economy because they can't get treatment. Long COVID's taken its toll. That might be something that ultimately hits our productivity in a way that we'll struggle to manage. In order to boost productivity as well as dealing with Brexit issues, we have to get a functioning healthcare system back. We cannot have millions of workers waiting ages for treatment or being told, oh, just go private. It's like, well, I ain't got the money to go private. It's killing our economy. Second issue with COVID is sort of more that global supply chains have been reordered. The world realised it's relied too much on China. The US and EU are working on bringing more production close to home, though the next presidential election could still throw that concept into chaos. But the UK is getting left behind. The Tories are trying to make an enemy of China publicly, but they're keeping our economy reliant on their output still. Until the election, our government has no industrial strategy. And when we do have a government with a strategy, we're going to find ourselves several years behind and on our own. And when you consider how interlinked the various problems are, it's easy to see how an overarching strategy is going to be needed. Something the Tories are utterly incapable of delivering. They just do sticking plasters. Oh, this thing that we neglected is broken down. Just patch it up, patch it up. Brexit is not only a problem in itself, it contributes to those volatile energy prices, low productivity and low investment. COVID is not just a problem in itself, it contributes to that low productivity and the interest rates. The low productivity is partially responsible for the rising interest rates. The long-term investment hits productivity as well. They're all interlinked. So you need an approach that takes all of the issues as one, as opposed to doing each one piecemeal. And the problem for Labour is that it'll not be either easy or quick to deal with. And some of these issues cannot be dealt with by the government alone. They're going to need international agreements as well, which we may or may not be able to get. And it's why Labour are attempting to manage expectations by under-promising and over-delivering, as they say. They need the public to basically vote for competence rather than some fantasy golden age that on the basis of the current economic situation is simply impossible to deliver. Because Labour may well have to look at a strategy that says, yeah, we can't get the economy turning round in the first Parliament, but we still need to win that next election. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.